evening. I'm always excited to come to IWS. It's just a wonderful time to be with you. I have to acknowledge that I've got a lot of members of Bethany in the house, and I want to thank them for coming as well. Among them is my son, one of my sons. He's a chaplain, and his lovely wife, and so I'm just so thankful. The word I chose was rejoice. And I want to talk about a God who gives us reason to rejoice. And let me define the word. Rejoice is a transitive verb that means to give joy or to gladden, to feel great delight or possess the same. It expresses an action but must have an object. It does not stand alone. In Luke 1, Mary gives us an example of how this word can be biblically applied. Listen to her when she says, "My soul glorifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God, my Savior." The object of her expressed need to rejoice is God, her Savior. This expressed joy in Mary is so overwhelming, it has gotten into her soul and spirit. The heavens open when our soul glorifies and our spirit rejoices. The motivation for her rejoicing revolves around this one fact: God has given her multiple reasons to rejoice. Mary then gives us several "he has done" phrases that form a virtual kaleidoscope of what it means to her to have the presence of God in her life. Now, this is important because for a God who has been silent for 400 years, from Malachi to Matthew, her words are astounding for at least two reasons. The first, by way of example. When I was a young child, we'd go to the local fair and get snow cones. And that was a real treat for us. We came from a disadvantaged neighborhood, humble beginnings. These snow cones were balls of crushed ice pressed into a paper cone with sugary syrup poured all over the ice. Now, those who know me know that I give food examples because I am a foodaholic. While delight and tasty, they never quite gave us enough of the sweet, sugary syrup. We often had more ice than sweet syrup. That's not what we see with Mary's sweet perception of God's selection of her. No disappointment here for Mary. Mary's "he has done" statements assert that there is a sugary sweet God syrup all over her life. From a position of not hearing from God to now being overwhelmed by God, this is simply and sweetly amazing to Mary. This second noticeable thing is that this young Mary, economically challenged Mary, low in social status Mary somehow has an intimate, reverent knowledge of this silent God. This suggests that although silent to some, God is obviously present to Mary. Let me tell you how. By way of teaching, by way of worship, by way of scriptural investigation. God, my brothers and my sisters, is never really absent or silent. God is always speaking to somebody somewhere. And we keep God present by talking and teaching, learning and reading, studying and sharing. Sort of what you do at IWS to the glory of God. What you do, teachers, faculty, students, advisors, trustees, and administrators, is invaluable. You keep God present for so many. You're to be commended. Give God a praise. me move on. I began to examine Mary's he has statements that were reason for her to rejoice. And here's some of them. He has performed. He has scattered. He has brought down. He has lifted up. He has filled. He has sent. He has helped. Now, what I discovered in my investigation was that Mary's reasons to rejoice were also my reasons to rejoice. And IWS, I've got to tell you, the sweet syrup of rejoicing began to flow all over my snow cone cup of life. What did David say in Psalms? My cup runneth over. Looking at my life, my personal snow cone of God's presence overwhelmed me. Mary was enraptured by the fact that God had chosen her over so many whom she would have deemed more qualified. She described herself as a servant of low degree. Get this too now. Mary did not have a self-esteem problem. She had no lack of confidence about who she was and what she could do through her God. Mary had an astonishment obstacle. Mary's thought were, how in the world did God, our God, choose me? A few questions for you. Is anybody here beyond where you thought you would be? Nancy traveling the world for the sake of the gospel. Jim, president of IWS. Instructors paid to teach. Students with opportunities to learn. Does anybody here have more than you thought you would have? And you have no idea how you got it. Anybody here educated above that which you thought was even possible? When I go back to my class reunion, they look at me and do not believe this constant CD student is a doctor. Has God ever moved your enemies, prepared a table before you in their presence, protected you from harm? And when we consider all God has done, we don't have a self-esteem problem. There is no lack of confidence about who we are and what we can do through Christ. We have an astonishment obstacle. And let me tell you, the only way to overcome that astonishment obstacle is to rejoice. To let God know, to let others know, friend and stranger alike, and know this, we have a right, just like Mary, to rejoice. There's even more great news in Psalms 18 and 24. It says, this is the day the Lord hath made. We will rejoice and be glad in it. We use this psalm in my church and we make it day specific. We read it during Sunday service, and you know how Pentecostals are. We don't need much of a reason to fervently rejoice. Every time I hear your presented worship, I rejoice. Every time I sing with you your closing song, I rejoice. Once you had an organist play and I thought I was in heaven. It was all I could do not to take flight and run around the church. But I digress. This psalm does not point to the day the Lord has made as only a specific 24-hour epoch of time. It can be, but there's also more. This day is an established, extended period of renewable opportunities to rejoice in the Lord. It's not just a day of the week, but more like heavenly opened span of time. This day the Lord has made. Let me tell you what that means to us. Not only do we have reason to rejoice, but we have plenty of time to do it. It is open season for rejoicing. I can rejoice all day. I can rejoice every day. I can rejoice in the church, outside of the church. I can rejoice at work. I can rejoice at home. I can rejoice when I'm in trouble. I can rejoice when I'm sick. and when I'm well. It's no secret. Growing up in the church, we would always say, these are the last days. It wasn't until I studied the Bible and understood that the last days are a dispensation ushered in by the death, burial, and resurrection. I love to hear you say regarding our faith, Christ has died, Christ is risen, Christ will come again. Just like we are in a season of awaiting his return, we should be in a season of constant rejoicing, not just on a day, but until he comes. Not just for one reason, but for a kaleidoscope of reasons. Let me conclude with what the Apostle Paul told the church at Philippi. Theologians say it was one of his favorite places to go. He was sharp with some of the people that he contacted with through letters and epistles. But they say he loved Philippi because they loved him back. And he wanted to make sure that they got every essence of his understanding of how to get in touch with this God. So when he contacted them, he said, rejoice always. And then he came back and he reiterated, he said, again, I say rejoice. This is one of my favorite places to be. I can't wait on the call twice a year. It stirs my heart when it comes. So I want to tell you my favorite place. Rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I say rejoice.